Welcome to Sounds of Resistance channel. The sudden raids of the Ukrainian armed forces swept through the Ukrainian plains like a storm and struck the Russian army. After these raids of the Ukrainian armed forces, not only the soldiers of the Russian army, but also Putin's most elite troops are destroyed. Since the beginning of the war, many units fighting in the Russian ranks, from Spetsnaz to the most famous Russian elite unit, the Wagner Elite Soldier Group, one of the largest mercenaries in the world, and the VDV elite paratroopers, were destroyed as a result of the attacks of the Ukrainian armed forces. We know that for the last 2 months, the Wagner Group has had great difficulties in finding new soldiers, whose losses amounted to tens of thousands. At the same time, it's reported that the Russian Spetsnaz special forces were not able to prevail over the Ukrainian special forces in many battles. Spetsnaz special forces have been wiped out in Ukraine after their consecutive losses. Even the most elite units of the Russian Spetsnaz failed many times against the Ukrainian Special Operations Forces, the Ukrainian Spetsnaz. Spetsnaz was used in many countries during the Soviet period as a special-purpose unit. Even now, in a few countries, including Ukraine, Special Operations Forces are referred to as Spetsnaz. In the Ukrainian Special Operations Forces, the Shaman Battalion, Kraken Battalion, Donbas Battalion, and Alpha Unit are the most special units. The Kraken Battalion stands out as a unit of the Azov Regiment and is still active in full force. This short-sightedness of Spetsnaz, who was sent to organize the attacks to the heart of the Ukrainian armed forces and to direct the Russian army, is fully reflected in the moves of the Russian army. Recent reports indicate that Vladimir Putin's all-out war against Ukraine has severely eroded Russia's military capabilities, including the shadowy Wagner Group. Russia's clandestine paramilitary force known as the Wagner Group is reportedly heavily worn out in Ukraine. Alongside Vladimir Putin's desperate enlistment effort, Wagner's oligarch founder is known to recruit mercenaries directly from Russia's prisons, as the war in Ukraine has deprived the once elite group of men and morale. Wagner not only had to recruit the battle-hardened, experienced men they sought from the African action sites at the beginning of the war, but rather filled their ranks with people. Of course, this made a huge difference in their ability to make a difference on the field. They are not what they were when this war began. In a full-scale war and not the fighting force intended to function in Ukraine, it turned out to be damaging not only the larger regular army but also Ukraine. These organizations also ignited a new crisis in the Russian army. The fact that Russian army soldiers were paid much less than Wagner mercenaries and performed much more dangerous missions created great unrest in the army. Consisting of veterans of the Russian armed forces, Wagner fought in Libya, Syria, the Central African Republic, Mali, and other countries. It was created in 2014 after Russia annexed Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula and began supporting pro-Russian separatists in the Donbas region in eastern Ukraine. The U.S. accused Russian mercenaries of using natural resources from the Central African Republic, Mali, Sudan, and elsewhere to finance Moscow's war in Ukraine, which Russia dismissed as anti-Russian outrage. It's known that the Wagner Group exploits natural resources and that these ill-gotten gains are used to finance Moscow's war machine in Africa, the Middle East, and Ukraine. Make no mistake, people in Africa are paying a heavy price for the Wagner Group's exploitative practices and human rights violations. Linda Thomas-Greenfield, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, spoke at a UN Security Council meeting on financing armed groups through the illegal trade of natural resources in Africa. Evgeny Prigozhin, founder of the Wagner Group, recently broke ranks to openly criticize Russia's highest-ranking soldier. After a series of defeats on the battlefield in Ukraine, Prigozhin mocked the generals, saying that the army was full of nepotism and that the high-ranking officers should be scrapped from the ranks and sent barefoot to the front to atone for their sins. When all these events are put together, it's understood how much unrest the Wagner mercenaries, which Russian President Vladimir Putin awarded with medals of bravery and heroism and gave great importance to, caused a great unrest in the Russian army. In particular, it's stated in intelligence reports that Russian officers complain about the undisciplined actions of the Wagner Group. At the same time, it seems that the Wagner Group is also complaining. Marat Gabidulin, a former Wagner mercenary, warned Vladimir Putin that he was becoming dissatisfied as his elite army group took the lead in the invasion of Ukraine. Mr. Gabidulin claimed that the Russian mercenaries were fed up with the organization of the military group. The former mercenary explained that the Wagner army was operating by inability to make competent decisions on the battlefield. Mr. Gabidulin explained to Melissa Bell that all the disorder meant more casualties for the Wagner army. It has been reported that Putin has lost some 1,500 soldiers from the Wagner army so far, and that number will continue to rise throughout the ongoing offensive in Ukraine amid reports that the army does not have the proper military equipment. They are dissatisfied with the general organization of the struggle, the inability to make competent decisions to organize battles, and this, of course, means casualties, the Wagner Group said in their military statement. No more flag jackets and helmets, the Wagner militants said in a video shared by Ukraine's defense ministry. Putin is striving to win the war in Ukraine and is taking drastic measures to do so. The Russian dictator also called for 300,000 more Russian men to join the war in Ukraine last month, and many refused and fled the country as soon as the announcement was made. Putin also enlisted Russian prisoners to join the war. There are ongoing reports that Russian troops chose to surrender to the Ukrainian forces. Thousands of Russian soldiers surrendered to Ukraine in Kherson and Kharkiv. It's stated that this number increased much more with the novice Russian soldiers who came to the region after the mobilization. Russian soldiers are fleeing for their lives, and this is important to understand, but also coincides with this mobilization in Russia, where they clearly understand that there is a problem at the front where the Russians have these images. And they are not very motivated to go back there and recapture these territories as Putin believes they can achieve. Considering whether winter will have an impact on how the war will continue over the next few months, this will reportedly affect Russian soldiers much worse. It's quite unusual for this high-intensity war to last this long. Let's remember that more than 7 months have passed, and we have quite large armies. Both sides are getting tired. But of course, on the Ukrainian side, you are constantly being reinforced by trained troops. For the Russian army, the loss of elite soldiers, apart from reinforcements, represents a very sad situation. Vladimir Putin's army has suffered the loss of many specialist officers since February, when it began its bloody invasion of Ukraine. Russia has lost more than 900 eminent Kremlin military experts since the invasion of Ukraine began. These include special forces officers, sailors, and paratroopers. It's known that Russia spent years of effort and millions of dollars to train these experts from various regiments. Current estimates from the Ukrainian armed forces put the number around 48,350 soldiers. Although Putin made great efforts to compensate for these losses and caused great unrest on his own people, he could not find a solution. As the Russian army loses, Putin's desperation will increase. Thanks for watching.